Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We'll be starting in 1 minute. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Labs 2024 Call for Ideas webinar. Before we start, a few reminders. This webinar is being live streamed and will be available on demand afterward. We'll send you the video link and the slides. We'll walk you through today the Call for Ideas, which is open until December 27. You'll learn about the lab process, selection criteria, and our priority areas and regions. If you have questions, please type them in the Q&A feature on Zoom, not the chat. You find the icon on the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. I'd like now to turn over to Ben Brochette, Associate Director at Climate Policy Initiative and the head of the Lab's global program. Ben, over to you.
Thanks so much, Julio, and hi, everyone. Yeah, here we go again. It's always a very exciting time for our team to kick off a new lab cycle. And really seeing the growing attention that the lab is getting is super encouraging. We hope that this webinar is helpful as a learning tool for all of you, just to learn more about the lab and our process, and helping to ensure ultimately that this lab cycle is as impactful as possible, and hopefully making all of our lives easier going forward. For those unfamiliar with Climate Policy Initiative, or CPI, the lab is one of our programs. CPI works with governments, businesses, and financial institutions to drive growth while addressing climate change. And our goal is really to accelerate the transition to net zero and climate resilient economies around the world. Thanks again for being here and for your interest in the lab. So let's go ahead and get started with today's agenda. We'll start by explaining how the lab works and how the lab helps develop climate finance instruments from idea to pilot. Then my colleague Kathleen will walk you through what the lab is looking for in 2024, detailing our regional programs and global thematic streams. After that, my other colleague Morgan will review a couple of successful applications and detail key questions on the submission form. Following those presentations, we'll go ahead and invite you all to ask questions. You can start typing your questions into the Q&A box at any time as they come up through the presentation, and then we'll go ahead and address these after the presentation during the Q&A period. So with that, I'll go ahead and start by introducing you to the lab program. So just some broad context setting here. Limiting warming to 1.5 is going to require massive investments, particularly from the private sector. One of the things, other than the lab, that CPI is also known for is our analysis of global climate finance flows. We've tracked global public and private investments in climate action for over a decade now, and our latest report that just came out found that climate finance surpassed $1 trillion for the first time in 2021, which is 6 years after the Paris Agreement was adopted. The green line on the graphic shows the average annual climate finance flows, including where it went to in 2021 and 2022, which reached almost $1.3 trillion. This is close to double the amount of climate finance that was invested in annually in 2019 and 2020, which is really great news and obviously shows the crucial momentum that climate investment is gaining. However, just shifting to the other side of that slide, if you look at the yellow area, you'll see the amount of capital that's needed annually by 2030 to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. This is at least 5 times higher than the current level of climate investment, and potentially quite a bit more. This, of course, includes the capital necessary not only to decarbonize the economy, but also to adapt to the impacts of climate change, which are very much already here and growing. I read this morning in the Wall Street Journal that climate change cost the US economy $1 billion every 3 weeks, and that was just from climate-related weather disasters. So clearly the investment needed in decarbonization and in adaptation and resilience is far greater than what we see flowing now, even with this crucial momentum and really encouraging movement that we've seen in the market. We can't reach trillions of dollars in investment, moving on to the next slide, by only involving governments, philanthropies, and development capital and impact investment. We're going to need to see a sea change in private investment, especially in emerging markets. And this is why the lab was created in 2014, specifically to identify and develop innovative financial mechanisms that have the potential to attract private capital into mitigation and adaptation projects in developing economies. What we look for are really innovative approaches to using small amounts of grants and concessional capital to achieve significant impact at scale and unlock private investment that we're not seeing flow now. So far, we've just been doing that and launched 68 instruments that have included funds, facilities, guarantees, bonds, insurance, and credit products, and more over the last 9 years. And the lab has mobilized over $3.5 billion US since we launched the lab 10 years ago. This includes $1.2 billion invested by members and observers as part of the lab network. And finance from the lab network has unlocked significant co-investment. I think just moving on to the next slide with our impact figures. Awesome. So this is close to 50% of the 3.5 billion mobilized has come from private investors, mainly commercial banks and institutionals and some private equity. And these are really the sources of capital that we desperately need in emerging economy climate projects, really the type of capital that we're looking to unlock. So we're really pleased to see that flowing through the lab's products that we've launched. We've had 85 different public and private investors invest in 36 different lab ideas. This is about a 57% capital mobilization rate across our portfolio, which we're really proud of. We feel this is a really balanced number. Part of innovation is sometimes trying things that may not raise capital and may not work, but this is quite a bit higher than other incubator and accelerator programs in the climate space or even in the broader commercial space. So we think this number really reflects the power of this program and the network that we have. So moving on to our theory of change. So this really revolves around the crucial collaboration between the public and private sectors, openly sourcing concepts, so going to the market to identify the most brilliant teams and ideas that are out there, and then bringing together a really powerful network to move these ideas into action, which you can see on the next slide, our network. The lab's model really draws heavily on its membership, which includes representatives from, at this point, over 75 different governments, investment banks, insurance companies, and development finance institutions from across the world. Lab members are tasked with selecting ideas and supporting the design and piloting of the ideas that come into each cohort of the lab, and supporting these in several ways throughout the process. And then in many cases, they're also investing in the instruments that come through the lab. You saw that figure earlier with over $1 billion invested through our members and observers over the past 9 years. So on the next slide, we'll go into a little bit more detail on how the program works in practice. So first, we have an annual open call for innovative investment solutions, which is, of course, open right now. We're really open to different types of institutions. This is a question that often comes up in this webinar, like what types of institutions you're looking for, what types of teams. We've received thousands of ideas over the past decade from really a wide range of institutions that have included startups, small and medium-sized entrepreneurs, boutique private equity firms and fund managers, as well as large public and private institutions and NGOs. The lab's ultimately looking for teams that have unique market knowledge and expertise, that have a clear vision for climate impact and mobilizing capital, as well as a really strong track record. Once the call for ideas closes in December, we screen these submissions to ensure they meet our criteria, and then lab members vote to select the most promising ideas that meet these criteria, which we'll go ahead and detail in a moment. During the development stage, so once the cohorts are selected, the Secretariat, lab members, and working groups that are comprised of other expert partners actually go ahead and partner with the proponent teams over several months to develop their concepts into bankable financial solutions. And once this analysis is complete, the lab members then vote to endorse the final instruments. This is kind of like a graduation ceremony in a way from our program. And this means that they're ready to move into the implementation support and go-to-market phase. This lasts for about a year, and this phase is where we help the endorsed instruments get off the ground. It's really focused on fundraising, on investor engagement, and additional support from the Labs network. So on to what the lab is looking for. Our website has a lot more information, including detailed guidelines and an FAQ, which I very much encourage you to read through if you're interested in this program. And we're posting those links into the chat now, so you can go ahead and click on those if you'd like and have them for reference later. At this point, I'll turn it over to my colleague Kathleen Mader, who's the Lab Program Associate, to introduce the 2024 Call for Ideas and just give you an overview in a bit more detail of what we're looking for this year. Kathleen, over to you.
Thank you, Ben. So first, allow me to give a sense of how the lab assesses the submissions it receives. Lab ideas are selected based on a set of 4 key criteria. The first one is actionability. The lab is looking for ideas that demonstrate 3 things in this regard. First, the involvement of entities that are able to implement the idea and have relevant experience. We're also searching for a clear pathway to implementation, and that includes a defined time frame, key activities, project milestones. And lastly, the identification of potential risks to implementation, as well as strategies for dealing with these risks. And this last element we'll discuss a bit further in a few slides with an example question from the questionnaire. So next is catalytic potential. In the lab context, we define this as the ability of the idea to mobilize private sources of climate finance. And to meet this criteria, ideas should demonstrate the potential to scale up private investment in the target markets and the ability or potential to replicate in other markets. Our third criteria is innovation. Successful lab ideas will demonstrate how the idea addresses barriers to climate finance that either have not yet been addressed or will be addressed more effectively than existing approaches in the markets. And in essence, we are looking for submissions that clearly articulate how the idea submitted is a value add to other efforts in the space. And then lastly, regarding financial sustainability, high-quality lab ideas will have a clear strategy for phasing out public and philanthropic financial support over time and achieving market viability on commercial terms, even if that runway is fairly long in certain cases. They should also identify challenges and risks in achieving these objectives and have strategies for managing those risks. So next, along with the 4 criteria that I presented on the previous slide, we also evaluate whether the idea is a good fit for the lab process. We're looking for ideas where the lab has a significant likely value add to the success of the instrument and the proponent team that is implementing the idea. We are looking for ideas where the capabilities of the lab team and network complement the proposing team's capabilities and needs, and also where the team has sufficient time available and a workable governance structure to participate fully in the lab process. The list on the right of this slide captures the lab's core activities and value offerings for reference. The same list is included in the questionnaire, and it will help us understand where the proponent team sees the most significant value adds of participating in the lab program. So moving on, more specifically about the 2024 Call for Ideas. Next year, we will have our largest lab cycle in our history. We will have 10 ideas to celebrate the lab's 10th anniversary in 2024. We're really excited to announce that the lab is introducing 2 new regional programs, one in Latin America and the Caribbean, and another in the Philippines. And we're also launching a new thematic global stream that targets high integrity forests. Our regional programs are building on the positive experience we've had with other consolidated regional programs in Brazil, India, and East and Southern Africa, which will continue to exist for our 2024 cycle. And on the global thematic side, we're reintroducing the Agriculture and Food Systems Lab Stream, which is now a partnership with the Climate Shot Investor Coalition, or CLIC. The lab is also offering 1 global adaptation spot targeting any emerging markets, and we have updated our traditional wildcard slot, which we've had for the last few years, to focus more specifically on climate mitigation and more specifically on energy and infrastructure. So let's dive into those streams in a little bit more detail, starting with the regional programs. The lab introduced its first regional program in India in 2015, and over time we've expanded to include a Brazil program and an East and Southern Africa program. These 3 regional programs have developed 29 solutions over the years, making up 40% of the lab's total portfolio. And the idea behind these regional programs is that they allow the lab to focus more on local contexts and priorities, and allows us to really address country-specific investment needs and barriers. They leverage national networks of highly capable financiers and implementers with deep knowledge of the local markets. And to qualify for any of these programs, your idea should primarily target one of the markets, regardless of the sector. All of our regional programs this year will select 1 idea each, but the exception is our Latin America and Caribbean program, as you can see on the slide, which will select 2 ideas, one that's focused on mitigation and the other focused on adaptation. So next we have our global thematic streams, and they will also select 1 idea for each of these streams for a total of 4 instruments in 2024. These streams focus on sector-specific climate investment needs and barriers rather than region-specific. So this year, we are looking for instruments that fit into 4 categories. The first is any solution that accelerates climate finance for businesses and organizations in the agriculture and food system sector. Second, we have innovative financial instruments that support the scale-up of private finance that build climate resilience for our adaptation stream. Third are any climate finance ideas focused on monetizing high-integrity forests. And for the climate mitigation theme, we're searching for scalable solutions in renewable energy, low-carbon transit, buildings, industrial sectors, the just energy transition, or anything related to the phase-out of coal and fossil fuel. And eligible ideas for our global stream should target emerging markets, but they don't necessarily need to be the same emerging markets as our regional programs. So with that, I will turn it over to my colleague Morgan Richmond, who is a senior analyst at CPI, and she will walk us through successful applications and detail a few key questions on the submission form. So over to you, Morgan.
Great, thanks, Kathleen. So to illustrate the evaluation of ideas submitted in practice, I'll share 2 examples of past lab instruments that were selected and successfully went through the lab process to endorsement. In the selection phase, here is why this idea stood out. So first, for cooling as a service, it was proposed to be a part of the 2019 lab cycle by the Basel Agency for Sustainable Energy and then the Kigali Cooling Efficiency Program, now called the Clean Cooling Collaborative. This instrument is a pay-per-service model to decrease energy consumption and HFC emissions from cooling systems by making more efficient cooling technologies more accessible and affordable to customers. Cooling as a service stood out in actionability as highly actionable with demonstrable team experience, an already executed MOU with a local partner in a proposed pilot country, and evidence in the submission that it did not rely on new legislation. It stood out as highly catalytic, with significant potential for scale, given projections that the global air conditioning market will triple by 2050, and presented a clear case for private investment. It was innovative. It applied the pay-per-service model to a new market, cooling, and articulated how it improved on existing financing approaches for clean cooling. And it showed high potential for financial sustainability, as it was clear how it would become a fully commercial solution that would not rely on grant finance in the long term. So that was cooling as a service. And then second, another example, Conservation International proposed the Restoration Insurance Service Company, or RISCO, in the same cycle as Cooling as a Service, 2019. RISCO is a social enterprise that invests in mangrove conservation and restoration in areas with high value coastal assets, protecting blue carbon and reducing flooding and property damage risk. RISCO, like Cooling as a Service, stood out against the lab criteria. On actionability, it was highly actionable with a team with a proven track record in the space, a submission to the lab that clearly articulated implementation milestones, and again, evidence that it would not rely on new legislation. Highly catalytic, with a concept already underway for scaling up operations and early estimates completed of market size and impacts. Innovative, the submission demonstrated that it was a novel approach to pricing the benefits of mangrove restoration with the potential for climate impact that improves on existing solutions. And finally, the potential for financial sustainability, as barriers to commercial viability were clearly identified and acknowledged, strategies to overcome them were articulated, and the plan for the use of grant capital was delineated and limited. Both of these ideas also clearly articulated in their submissions how the lab process could bring value to their efforts to implement, and it was clear that the teams proposing the ideas had sufficient capacity to engage as part of the lab process. With those two examples, let's now move on to specific guidance on a number of the key questions that you will see in the questionnaire. So zooming in on the lab application, I'll walk through 3 examples of what we're looking for when reviewing key application questions, along with a few sample responses from submissions that the lab ultimately selected. Beyond assessing how actionable, catalytic, financially sustainable, and innovative your idea is, as Kathleen mentioned, we'll also look to ensure that the lab is well suited to support you in developing your idea. For example, the lab does not provide direct funding for selected instruments. It's a question that we receive frequently, so only applicants seeking technical assistance from the lab will be considered. To gauge whether the lab is a good fit for your idea, the application asks for your objectives in applying to the lab and how the lab process can help you achieve those goals. Before answering this question, we recommend that you review the lab's impact report on our website. You'll find specific examples of how the lab has previously supported instruments that can help guide your ideas about the kinds of support that the lab could offer you. Once you've had a look at the impact report, you should frame your response in the context of how the lab's technical assistance offerings can help you develop your idea. Note that the highlighted text in the sample response at the bottom of the slide clearly outlines how the lab can assist by stress testing the concept and assessing risks to implementation. When reviewing your responses, we'll also want to ensure that the lab's core competencies and value offerings are well suited to meet your needs. Note that the sample response here at the bottom of the slide references 2 key areas of the lab's value proposition: blended finance expertise and knowledge of impact KPIs. Next, to make sure that you're well equipped to fully engage throughout the course of the lab process, and more importantly, to assess whether you're willing and able to implement your idea following the conclusion of the lab process, we'll ask what resources you plan to commit to developing your instrument. One of the first things we'll look for is buy-in from high-level staff, such as department heads or managing partners, as highlighted in the example at the bottom of the slide. Demonstrating high-level buy-in will help alleviate concerns that organizational priorities might shift away from instrument development. We'll also want to see that developing your idea into an actionable financial instrument is the primary responsibility of at least one core team member. The lab process is highly collaborative, so it's crucial to have a reliable point of contact who will prioritize the process and who is empowered to make key instrument design decisions. Finally, we'll need to see that you're committed to developing the idea in the long term. The core lab process lasts only 7 months, far shorter than the time it takes to fully develop and launch a new financial instrument. So we want to see that you're willing and able to dedicate sufficient long-term resources to implementing your idea after the lab cycle concludes. We know that implementation is a full-time job that will require significant long-term resources, such as a fully dedicated team, as described here in the sample response at the bottom of the screen. And then finally, we'll look to gauge the extent to which you've thought through the risks to implementing your idea and the strategies that you'll employ to address those risks. When answering this question, it's important that you be transparent with us insofar as you can. This example response highlights risks that are genuinely challenging to overcome. All instruments face material challenges like currency risk, unexpected economic shocks, etc. So addressing some real tough challenges directly is important rather than minimizing or avoiding them in your response. Next, you'll want to identify mitigation strategies, risk mitigation strategies that are uniquely tailored to address the risks you outline. It's helpful to have a diversified risk mitigation strategy. You'll note that this sample response describes 2 strategies intended to be used in tandem to address currency risk. Strong submissions will also demonstrate strategies that indicate differentiation from the market to the point on innovation. For example, the sample response at the bottom of this slide highlights how the applicant planned to use proprietary data and modeling tools to respond to changing market dynamics. So with that context set on the things that we're looking for, the criteria, and then context on the lab itself, back to Ben to kick off the Q&A.
Great. Thanks so much, Morgan and Kathleen, for framing that up. I see there's already a number of questions that have come in through the Q&A tool. Please don't be shy. Go ahead and write any questions or comments that you might have into that Q&A box, and we'll try our best to answer them. So maybe I'll just pick up one that I saw reflected in a couple of the questions here, just around what category or sector or stream you should be applying to. First of all, just to reassure everyone, even if you are self-categorizing incorrectly, and all of these are reviewed, we'll have 2 to 4 people on our team looking at every single submission, and we reserve the right to categorize those based on where the lab feels it's the best fit and that it will have the most potential to succeed. There's obviously cross-cutting sectors. If you are an agriculture adaptation solution, you are going to fit into adaptation and in agriculture. I would encourage sector-specific proposals to apply into their sector. So if you are squarely food systems and agriculture, then it would probably be best to apply into that. Same thing with crossover regionally, right? There you could be an adaptation idea that is agriculture, that is in East and Southern Africa. We will certainly see a lot of these. Again, we'll categorize depending on where we see the highest fit there. So if you're a sector specific idea, go ahead and apply to the sector specific stream. If you are squarely one region or one country, and you may have something that is cross-cutting within the sectors, go ahead and apply for the regional program that is the best fit for you. So yeah, you won't be reducing your chances or eliminating your chances for selection because you chose one of the streams over another one. So just, yeah, I know this is a question that always comes up. And as we grow the lab and there's more regional programs and more crossover, that ends up becoming something that comes up a lot. So hopefully that is more or less clear. And if you're across multiple regions, that's completely fine as long as the focus is on emerging markets only. Also had some questions come up around who is eligible to apply. Both of those examples that were given are completely fine. So if you're based outside of the region you're implementing, that's fine. I would say that in many cases it is important to have boots on the ground. So having folks that are locally based that understand that market context is an advantage and it shows actionability and it shows the strength of the team. But many of the successful teams that we've worked with have had a headquarters or a base somewhere in the global north or in a market outside of the implementation area, but then have had a small or a large presence in the country or region where they're expecting to implement. Maybe I'll just kick it over to Morgan. Maybe if you want to answer the question, saw one come through, which is a good one around applicants, whether they have to be fund managers during implementation. This is a good one. Maybe you can provide some context on the different types of entities that we've worked with.
Sure, thanks, Ben. The answer is no. The shortest version of the answer is no. One does not have to be a fund manager to apply to the lab, to be a part of the lab process. There are lots of different types of proponent organizations that have been really successful through the lab process. Even taking the two examples from the two 2019 instruments that were selected in the lab, the Basel Agency for Sustainable Energy is a nonprofit based in Switzerland, and then Conservation International, likewise, was not a sort of operating as a fund manager in the context of RISCO at the time. So no, there are lots of different types of institutions that can be successful nonprofits. There certainly are fund managers who are involved in the lab process. There are also entrepreneurs within development finance institutions or commercial finance institutions. Essentially, the criteria for a proponent is the most basic version is anyone with a financial instrument that they're seeking to implement that fits with the criteria presented during the presentation. So that's on that piece. Maybe one other question, then I'll pass back to you, or one other set of questions. I saw a couple of questions about what is the amount of funding from the lab? What's the should there be an ask? Just to clarify again, the lab itself does not offer direct funding to instruments. The value add, sort of value proposition of the lab is the technical assistance and expertise provided by the lab secretariat, CPI, as well as the lab membership, and the sort of suite of 75 plus organizations that are part of the lab network. So yeah, just to clarify on that, what we're looking for, successful applicants are looking for that core lab support, not funding. Though of course, many instruments we know are also seeking funding and part of the lab process. And as Ben mentioned, one of the things we're really proud of is that so many of the lab instruments that have come through the process have gone on to raise substantial capital. So we're conscious of that, but the core value offering of the lab itself is not direct grant funding. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, Ben.
Yeah, maybe just to pick up on what you were saying, Morgan, there was also a question that came through around the benefits of the lab, what type of support would be provided. I know we went into this in a little bit of detail earlier, both in the case studies that Morgan provided and some of the information that Kathleen was talking about, but just to summarize that, so a little bit more on the lab's technical assistance. So what we do is we'll typically have a team of 2 to 3 analysts and consultants, or consultants from our side, so from the CPI team, that basically form as partners or sort of entrepreneurs in residence within the proponent team. So they'll be almost full-time for about 7 months, just really supporting all aspects of the development of the concept. So thinking about the capital stack design, looking at comparable instruments in the market, conducting tons of interviews with different investors, stakeholders, other fund managers that have applied similar approaches, whether it's through the lab or through other programs. And then crucially, we form that working group of usually somewhere between 15 and 25 institutions. These will be donors, development banks, pro bono legal support that the lab provides from large international firms to think about structuring and the market context, regulators in some cases, and then basically any other stakeholders that the proponents might be working with already will be invited to take part in that working group as well. This will include full group meetings where the lab team will present progress and ideas and get feedback on that, and then also bilateral interviews, so having the chance to talk directly to some donors, many of which could be potential investors or grant backers into the fund. So that's really the type of support that we're providing and looking at. And we also do a lot of work on impacts, so looking at both the quantitative and qualitative climate impacts, the social impacts, developing a gender impact plan. So each of those, and then of course setting up the necessary and helping to support the partnerships that might be necessary to get this off the ground. Looking at pipeline, analyzing that, building it, and every instrument is going to look very different depending on the context and what you're trying to do and the level of advancement that you might be in coming in. So yeah, hopefully that's helpful just to articulate the type of support that we're providing. Of course, access to the network is crucial. The lab network has invested billions into our portfolio instruments, and they continue to be super engaged. So we have a really strong track record of raising capital through this program, even if there isn't a specific grant amount attached. But yes, you will be expected to self-fund your operations and need to be able to do that, as well as dedicate time. And this is also a key question that comes up a lot. How much time are we expected to provide here? This varies, but I think what we say is typically we need at least one person within a team that is willing to dedicate around 3 days a week, so around 50% or more of their time to this process. In the most successful cases, it's usually a team of a few people that are spending somewhere between half to all of their time on this over a few months. So it is an intensive process. We try to get a lot done within a pretty short amount of time. It's a challenging thing to raise a new fund or financial vehicle and bring that to market. And we're trying to push that process into about a year and a half total within the lab, with that first 7 months being a really intensive technical assistance and design process. So yeah, just flagging that as, again, it's a question that comes up quite a bit. Yeah, just looking, I think there was a couple of questions that came in on both on technology readiness level and sort of the stage of development that we're looking for. Yeah, maybe I'll just turn this over to Morgan and to Kathleen, if either one of you or both of you want to comment on this, just sort of the level of development that we're looking for. I mean, I would flag on the technology thing specifically. I mean, we are not a technology focused accelerator. We are looking to support financial innovations around mature technologies. So that's something to note. We have had some emerging tech that proponents have designed a financial vehicle around, which is fine, but that whatever technology you're looking to apply needs to be proven and clear and transparent to an investment audience before applying. But yeah, maybe over to you, Kathleen, if you want to pick that up first, or Morgan.
Yes, happy to attempt that question. So in terms of the stage that we're looking for our ideas, Morgan kind of walked through it with her sample questions, sort of what we're looking for in terms of actionability of your idea. That's really critical. The lab is a little bit earlier stage than many other accelerators in this space. We are typically looking for an idea that is either pre-pilots or in the early pilot stages that could still benefit from the instrument design and all of the technical assistance that the lab is able to offer. Usually we're looking for some kind of evidence of, likelihood of the success of the instruments, but our ideas vary greatly in terms of the maturity of the instrument structure, pathway to markets, and sort of how far along they are in terms of financial modeling. I will say, just to quickly plug, in case you have attended this webinar and you see that maybe the lab isn't the best stage for your instrument, you're farther along, you maybe have a concept that's already market ready, We also have the Catalytic Climate Finance Facility, which is a partnership between Climate Policy Initiative and Convergence. We could definitely drop that link into the chat for folks who think that their ideas may be a little too late stage for the lab. But Morgan or Ben, if you have anything to add, please do.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Kathleen. Yeah, there were a couple of questions that alluded to the role of carbon credits and the voluntary carbon market and how we sort of tend to think about that within the lab. So Morgan, maybe over to you to provide a little bit more context and maybe some examples of how that's been integrated with some of the successful proposals that we've seen.
Sure. Yeah, I think the first thing I would say is that yes, we would welcome carbon credits related ideas. See, in each cycle we see quite a number of instruments that have some credits, either are sort of centrally focused on credits or have some relevance to them. And within the application, of the applications that we receive, most years there's at least one instrument that has a carbon credits element to it. Maybe in the chat, actually, we could include a few of them as to give you a sense of what has been supported by the lab in recent cycles. I would say in terms of the, I think the question raised, or the question of integrity, I think that's the right framing to be thinking about. I think we in the application, as you submit it, talking about that sort of throughout the application, and particularly in the piece of the application on what risks do you see to implementation, I think is one of the right places to talk about that. I actually think for instruments beyond carbon credits, that's true, that sort of if one of the identified challenges is integrity or sort of constraints from the market, skepticism from the market, talking about that and then talking about the ways that you plan to address that and what you see as the solutions to integrity concerns is a good place to talk about that, and we'll be looking for that in applications. I think that's more or less all I would say is basically yes. Open to credits. Actually, maybe the final note is on the innovation criteria, as Kathleen mentioned in the presentation, one of the things that the lab is looking for is that the instrument as proposed is innovative in terms of its financial structure or its target markets or the particular sector. And thus, in the carbon credits context, we would be looking for instruments that are not purely, if it's exactly an instrument that has been advanced elsewhere, a type of carbon credit and an approach that we've seen before, that's probably not a good fit for the innovation criteria of the lab. Framing around some level of innovation in sector, structure, region, et cetera, is critical to fitting with that criteria. But let me leave it there and I'll pass back to Ben.
Yeah, that's great, Morgan. Yeah, just underscoring that need when applying carbon credits to think very, very deeply about integrity, about community benefits and impacts. And when we see carbon credits or other market mechanisms being applied, we're really looking at the integrity concerns there. This is another whole suite of CPI's work is focused around integrity in the carbon markets. So obviously that's something that we hope that our proponent teams are really taking seriously. Obviously this is a very hot and very public topic right now within the climate finance community. But at the same time, we love to see carbon credits being applied and used appropriately, and see this as a way to, I think, as the person who asked the question alluded to, playing a role in improving and increasing the integrity and effectiveness of those markets. How do you define what a financial instrument is? This is a great question, and we do have quite a bit of language around this in the FAQs and in the guidelines and even in the call for ideas form. So a financial instrument in the lab context can include a whole suite of different forms of capital application and design, but there needs to be a pathway where investors get paid and a clear sort of value chain of beneficiaries and inputs and outputs for the various pieces of capital that might be going into the fund or product. So this, of course, includes funds, structured finance. It's included bonds, debt instruments, credit products, loan products, insurance, in some cases, platforms, but there needs to be a clear financial lens to this. So if you're applying as a business or you are applying as a project that is looking for project finance but does not have an actual fund or instrument that you're offering, those will not be eligible. So this is not a grant program that funds businesses producing goods and services per se, or will fund an individual project. There needs to be a financial solution. That's really the niche where the lab plays. So hopefully that is clear. Again, we have a lot of written materials to define what that is. And ultimately, I would just encourage you to look on our website. We have 68 different ideas that are the types of things that we're looking for. So you can scan through, filter by different approach, different financial instrument type, and hopefully get a really good idea of what we look for and what might not be eligible within that. Just looking specifically at some of the others. Morgan, go for it.
Okay. Yeah, I'm looking at this sort of final question in the current list on, are you if targeting global markets have a regional focus? The answer is yes. I think this actually is one of the core potential value offerings of the lab, depending on the instrument and the needs. But yes, a significant part of what the lab can be helpful with is exactly figuring out which regions make most sense for targeting for global instruments. Of course, if the instrument is applying in a regional stream, then more set. But for many of the global instruments, part of what we're working with them on is market mapping and analysis, understanding the enabling environments in various countries and national context, what have you. So very helpful in the application to understand what decision making and thinking has already gone on internally. But the lab can be helpful as in the process of determining regional targeting with the note of must focus on emerging economies. And so to the second point on carbon credits, I think a perfect example that part of the lab's support could be technical work to help think about where are the right places with that have sort of the sufficient enabling environments for carbon credits. Same in the context of adaptation, same in the context of infrastructure investment. One other question that I'll answer as well, and then I'll pass back to Ben, is on the question of, are we looking for sort of a more centralized team, or could it be an idea coordinated by a core team with different partners? Welcome ideas that are submitted with that are sort of from a partnership. So if it's a core team but involving different partners, associations, and stakeholders, that's great. There's a piece of the application that will allow you to articulate that and sort of frame, here would be the set of institutions or individuals who'd be the day-to-day context, here are the partnerships. The more information you can offer on that, the better, so that we just have the best idea of the current state of the instrument. But yes, really welcome. Centralized teams are great and fine. Partnerships really give us a sense of the work that you have already done and the potential actionability of the instrument. So welcome those. Back to you, Ben.
Well, I think we can probably wrap up. I believe we've spoken to most or all of the questions There were some that were a bit similar, so we tried to loop those into a broader answer. Of course, we're available if there are questions that come up. Please do take a look through that FAQ doc. And if there's anything else, feel free to reach out to our team. We're always available to answer questions. We'll be conducting a number of other webinars as well, some that are region specific, as well as in different languages or the other regional streams. So yeah, with that, I believe we are going to have a poll that will pop up there. So please do fill that out before exiting the webinar. And thanks again for all of your great questions and engagement. The recorded webinar will be available soon, and we'll follow up via email with a link to it, as well as the slides that you just saw. So we're really looking forward to seeing and looking over your submissions this year. And again, just let us know if you have any other questions. Thanks so much.